Hi, I'm Laura Bailey, and I am a student in Dr. Stephen Hooker's class. It's EDL 611. And for this assignment, I have been tasked to give a review of sorts of a book by Dr. Jim Lutzy, who is a former professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and former chancellor at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington. The title of the book is Entering North Carolina, Set Clocks Back 100 Years. So you can kind of gather from the title of the book that Dr. Lutzy was not very happy with things that have been going on in North Carolina. And the premise of his book, or the main purpose of his book, is to talk about the downward spiral that public education, has been taking, especially in the last decade since 2010. Dr. Lutzy is very partisan in his beliefs, and that is very clear throughout the book. That if you read just a portion of the book, you would be able to recognize his political beliefs pretty easily. But I do appreciate that throughout the book he does give credit to both Democratic leadership in North Carolina as well as Republican leaders for turning education around in earlier times. He credits Democratic governors like Jim Hunt and Terry Sanford, as well as Republican governors like Jim Martin, for helping to develop a sound system of education. One of the things that I couldn't agree with more that Dr. Lutzy talks about throughout his book is just the importance of having a sound educational system and how that can benefit our state as a whole. Because if we are turning out qualified students out of our educational institutions, that they're going to be able to join the workforce, they're going to be able to contribute to the economy, they're going to pay taxes. So ultimately recognizing that in order to have a successful state, we definitely need a successful system of public education. And so I certainly think that that's one of the strongest points that he makes in his book. He talks about he gives you a lot of political history in the book, makes some connections between post-Civil War politics and today's politics, and also analyzes the impact that those political decisions and those political movements have had on public education in our state. But really, again, the focus is just on the fact that he is very, very firm in his belief that reducing the amount that the state allocates to public education is a disservice to the public and ultimately a bad policy. So it talks about periods of progress in North Carolina as well as periods of regression, or as he refers to it, we kind of go one step forward and take two steps back. It is a little, he references the presidential election of 2008 as kind of being a tipping point. He talks about North Carolina being a poor rural state for so long, and credits those governors and those leaders that we talked about, that I spoke about just a few minutes ago, as being the ones who helped to develop that sound system of education that helped make our state more in line with the rest of the country. But then in 2008, when Barack Obama was elected president, it's kind of ironic that he uses that as a tipping point for how our education system kind of began to decline again. But he talks about the deeply rooted racism in North Carolina, and how when Obama won the state of North Carolina, even if it was by a narrow margin, he believes that motivated those Republicans, and that led to a sweep of the 2010 state elections. And he refers to them as ultra conservative Republicans who began leading the state in 2010, and thus leading to the current decline in public education that we have seen in the last decade. As a 20-year veteran in education in North Carolina, I can certainly agree with his stance that education has definitely declined in the last decade. I do want to point out some things, though, some kind of connections that I made to our coursework this semester. And he talks a lot about adequate funding. And yes, I mean, in order to have a sound public education system, we do have to have adequate funding. But as we learned throughout a lot of our coursework this semester, that is not in itself going to solve the problems, because if we could purchase success, if money could buy success in our schools, I'm almost positive that the money would be found to do that. So to me, lack of funding is obviously an issue, but the bigger issue, in my opinion, is just overall lack of respect and how public education has been devalued over the years. We're very much a micromanaged profession, where people feel like they can come into our jobs every day and tell us how to do our jobs. And so, that lack of respect and, the theory that education isn't, that anybody can teach and that it's not important, is one of the bigger problems that I feel like education is facing in North Carolina today. And until education is recognized for the vital role it plays in, helping our state and our economy be successful, then the dismantling that Lutzy speaks of in public education is going to continue. I do appreciate some of the suggestions that he gives and some of the recommendations that he believes will help move our education system in the right direction. One of the strategies that stood out to me the most was just talking about changing the mindset of the business community. And I guess the reason that stood out to me is because in a lot of the case studies that we talked about this semester, we looked at those successful school boards were successful because of the partnerships and the relationships that they forged with communities and with business partners and local chambers and things like that. So getting those business entities on board and helping them to recognize the important role that a sound public education system can play for them in their current roles, I think is very important as well. And so I thought that was a great recommendation that he had. And finally, he just spoke about the importance of having all public educators come together. And sometimes we just see ourselves in separate entities as K-12 educators. Then we see the community college, and then we see the public universities. But in order to really make a difference, we're going to have to come together and form a community of our own and recognize that we're not perfect and that education reform is needed at all levels. And that if we can do that and really be advocates for public education, that will help begin moving us back in the right direction.